Today, we hear a story of someone who knew what she wanted out of motherhood and knew how she wanted to feed her baby and had to drown out the voices around her to focus on what she knew was best for her daughter and herself to get there. She learned to stand strong in what she knew was right for her, despite criticism and discomfort with her decision to use her body in a way that humans have been doing to feed their babies since the beginning of human history. As you listen, think about the negative voices you've had to drown out. How have you approached these voices? Did you ignore them? Did you try to educate them? What impacts are your decisions having on the next generation of breastfeeding mothers?
So my name is Olivia Friel. I am a mama to an incredible 3-year-old girl, which I cannot believe. I'm very passionate about everything in the birth space. I have been since before my daughter was even born. I was a birth and postpartum doula prior to my daughter being born. I also did a childbirth education course, but I didn't finish the test. So I'm not technically a childbirth educator, but I'm very well versed in the birth space. And I think I learn new stuff every single day. And I think it's incredibly important to have conversations about birth, pregnancy, breastfeeding. Very passionate about all of those things. So I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, and that passion, we'll talk about this a little bit at the end too, but that passion has led you to how we met each other. You also have a podcast. Yeah.
I do, yes. Oh yeah, I forgot. I was like thinking about what can I say about myself? So yes, I do have a podcast where we discuss a lot of those topics that I was just mentioning. So
yeah, that's amazing. We'll hear more about that. Tell me a little bit about what your exposure specifically to breastfeeding was before it was your turn.
So growing up, I don't think there was anyone in my family who breastfed around me. Or if they did, I certainly don't remember it. It was not around me. It was not talked about. The first person I actually saw breastfeeding was my cousin, who is only a few years older than me, when she had her daughter. That was the first time I was ever exposed to breastfeeding. Literally, I think she's the only person thinking about it. And I knew nothing about it, but I remember seeing her do it and I was like, oh, I want to do that. Like, I want to learn more about that. And in my mind, I'm the type of person that when I want to learn something about something new or I'm not familiar with it at all, I will sit and do hours and hours of research, whether it's looking at studies, whether it's reading books, whether it's listening to podcasts. Like I have to know about it. And because I think it's important that we know about the things that we haven't experienced yet, hope to experience. And so, yeah, that was my cousin. Breastfeeding was honestly my first exposure. And then prior to my daughter being born, there was one other person who was an extended family member who was breastfeeding, but they were the only two people that I had ever really seen breastfeed. And even, yeah, I worked with so many babies, and literally don't remember one mom coming in to breastfeed, which is crazy if you think about it.
Yeah. And it really is a lost. We almost lost it. We almost lost breastfeeding. Yeah. Yeah. So then you started to dive down the research rabbit hole, and then you become pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Did you start researching before you were pregnant yourself, or in preparation to be pregnant? What was that? What did that timeline look like?
Researching just on breastfeeding?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I started researching it before I was pregnant and then continued while I was pregnant. But the thing that I realized is that in the traditional childbirth education courses within hospital settings, they don't really talk about breastfeeding very much. They say you'll have support during the postpartum. If you're in the hospital during your stay, someone will come in and help you. But they really don't talk about it like at all. And so for me, in my mind, I just knew I was like, I'm going to breastfeed. Like I just am. And I think one of the other things that it's important to remember is that the mental piece during pregnancy and labor and birth and postpartum is like huge. Like believing in yourself, believing in your ability to do something, believing that your body was created to do something. Like I said, there may be situations where it may not work out the way that you had expected it to, but the majority of the time, our bodies can do things, but we also have to believe that they can.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, in my mind, I was like, I'm going to breastfeed. I was like, I don't know what's going to come up or what obstacles I might face or people's opinions, but I'm just going to breastfeed. I just decided it.
And were there any goals that you set for yourself as far as amount of time you wanted to feed or?
Yeah. So I went into it thinking that I would pretty much be breastfeeding. And then I knew I was going to be home with her. So the topic of a bottle was discussed, but it was never actually implemented. So I think that there could have been more effort, but it wasn't something that really mattered a lot to me. So she's technically my goal was at least a year.
Okay.
And it's funny, I was having this conversation with one of my friends about breastfeeding and about our thoughts on it growing up if we're not exposed to it. Like I remember thinking breastfeeding past when kids have teeth is gross or weird. But before I became a mom, I was like, yeah, I want to do like at least a year. Like I researched all of the benefits of breastfeeding nutritionally and bonding wise. And I was like, I at least want to do it for a year minimum. And here we are 3 years later. So
Yeah.
it's way more than I thought it was going to be, but it's been life-changing.
So, was there anything about the birth that might have impacted how breastfeeding started for you? Paint the scene for us as soon as baby's born. Tell us what happens next.
Yeah, she was delivered and she came very fast. So I went into active labor probably around 11 and she was born at 2:14. So she came really fast. And she was placed on my chest. Well, I wouldn't say like up on my chest. She was a little bit lower because her umbilical cord was actually shorter than we expected. So she was on my chest. I was holding her until, like I said, until her umbilical cord stopped pulsating. I actually cut the umbilical cord, which was really cool.
Really? You don't
Yeah,
meet very many people who cut their own baby's umbilical cord.
it was really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, and she was with me. I don't even remember. This is the thing, is like when you're in birth la la land, you're like, I don't even know how long I held her for. But it was a while, obviously, because we did the delayed cord clamping. But then they took her over to just weigh her and measure her and all of that sort of stuff. And that's the part where I'm like, I wish I just like told them no. I just still feel now with what I know in terms of the golden hour and what is so important for a mom and baby to bond and just be with you, and all of these unnecessary things, waiting is just far more important.
Did you know that this was a possibility beforehand, or was it all happening in the moment and baby's being
Yeah.
taken away from you?
Yeah, it was.
And
That's
you
exactly
almost
what it
can't
was.
even say anything.
Yeah. And I mean, I know
Yeah.
now, but like in that time I was just like out of it, and they they were stitching me up. They said I had a second degree tear. So I think that was why I was kind of just like out of it, kind of frazzled. But I would definitely change that. But then she was given back to her dad, and then we were moved over to the postpartum unit or whatever they call it, and she was in my arms the whole time. And that's where she latched for the first time. But I really did not enjoy the postpartum breastfeeding education, the way that they went about it. I was not a fan of at all.
Yeah, tell me about that.
So they came in and I hadn't slept. It's like, but she latched on her own. I did that without anybody coming in or telling me how to do it or anything. I was just like, let's just try this. And we're just going to see what happens. So we did that and she latched. And then somebody came in, I would probably say like an hour and a half or so later, just to check and see if she had nursed yet. And then to tell me what our breastfeeding schedule should look like. And she was also super, she was trying to like physically show me like where my boob's supposed to go, where she's supposed to be. And I understand, but she was like she did not really have like bedside manner and was very, very rough. And I'm like, I understand that you see breasts every single day and you may be used to seeing breastfeeding going on, but like, I just had a baby. Let's just check in with me, see how I'm doing, see if I'm comfortable with you touching me that way. And so I was just not a fan of that. And then she was saying that I should wait space it out every 2 to 3 hours. And I remember just sitting there thinking, I'm not going to do that just because that is what everybody else does. Like if I feel like I want to nurse her, I'm going to nurse her when I want to, because it's brand new territory. You don't know what breastfeeding is going to feel like. You don't know what breastfeeding is going to be like. You don't know when they're going to want to nurse. You don't know what position they're going to like best or how it's going to feel for you on one breast versus the other breast. And so she said that, and I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm just not. And they also were very, you can't hold your baby in bed. You might fall asleep, that sort of thing. I also had told them that she would not be in the nursery at all, that she was going to be in the room with us the entire time. And that did happen. But yeah, some of the things, like I get hospital policies, I understand that, but I was like, if I want to hold the baby that I just gave birth to, I'm going to hold the baby I just gave birth to because she's my daughter.
Right.
So yeah. And I think just knowing in the back of my mind that the whole lack of individualized care exists, like when someone tells you that you should do this because this is the standard schedule that everybody else does, it just did not rub me the right way.
I have heard from so many people who have said they won't see a lactation consultant ever again because they have had a similar experience such as this. So to those of you who have experienced someone manhandling your body and forgetting that you are a human being and touching you unnecessarily, I am sorry. Most of the time, a lactation provider does not need to touch you to provide lactation care because it is you and your baby who need to learn to feed your baby. It is okay to decline being touched. Do you want to work with a lactation provider who innately understands this? My primary goal as your lactation provider is to hear what your goals are and to help you tune into your body and your baby to help you get there. I would love to be the provider that understands the barriers you have faced, the environment you are navigating, and then helps you relieve the stress of feeding your baby. This can be virtually or in person if you live close to me. You can find me at www.quabbinbirthservices.com. It's linked in the show notes. And if you are a lactation provider, please listen to this with new ears, both to her discomfort with being touched and to the confusion so many people feel about the blanket advice to feed every 2 to 3 hours. So many babies need to nurse more frequently than this to gain weight and build a robust milk supply. Can we instead teach hunger cues and teach parents to tune in to their babies and not the clock?
So many people walk away from the hospital thinking they need to feed their baby every 2 to 3 hours.
Yes.
Instead of thinking, these are the cues of a hungry baby, a hungry breastfeeding baby, because many of us have never seen a hungry breastfeeding baby. So that might be something we need to learn
about.
Someone might need to, it might be nice to talk about that. So, hey, this is what these are the early cues, because sometimes, as many of us have experienced who have ever breastfed a baby, if you get beyond those early cues, it's harder to latch in those early days, right?
Yes. Oh my goodness.
These are the early cues. These are the you need to feed me now cues, and these are the you've waited too long cues.
Right.
And
That's what I was going to say.
that happens long before 2 to 3 hours.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So my initial thoughts on it were just that it was ridiculous to say that. And then once I was home and she was nursing as much as she was nursing, I remember sitting there thinking, how many mothers are being done a disservice by thinking that their newborn baby should be on this 2 to 3 hour schedule while they have engorged breasts that are hurting and sore and potentially causing clogged milk ducts or mastitis, and their baby screaming and crying, and they're like, what's wrong? Because they don't know, because it's new for both of them. And so I just remember sitting there and thinking that, and then also having people, whether it was my friends or my family, being like, well, didn't she just nurse? Didn't she just eat? And I looked at them and I said, yes, but she's showing me that she's still hungry, or that she's now hungry again. So I'm going to nurse her.
And then we have so many people that get a few weeks out and their milk supply is lower than what it
Yep.
needs to be.
Yep.
Because they have fed on a schedule.
And they feel so discouraged and they feel like their body's failing them.
Yes.
And women also, and mothers too, like we were talking about before, we just like shame storm ourselves. We're like, there's something wrong with me. I'm doing this wrong. I'm such a failure. And then that only perpetuates potential issues with your milk supply. Feeling like you're not producing enough.
Right, absolutely. So how did you, I know you had educated yourself well, so that really helps to feel secure in what you had learned. But new motherhood allows for a lot of doubts to creep in. So in those moments when your baby's nursing really frequently, how did you help yourself to feel secure that your baby was normal and you were doing the right thing?
I think part of it was just like mama intuition. And the other part of it was that I had read this story. It's circulated around on Facebook and probably blogs for years and years about this woman who went to, I believe it was South Africa, and she was observing a tribe of women, grandmothers, mothers, and their babies and their children, and how she realized that the babies hardly ever cried. And so she was asking one of the grandmothers about it. She's like, how come in America we hear babies crying all the time? They always seem so unhappy. And why is it different here? Why do we never hear the babies crying here? And the mothers in the villages, they wear their babies pretty much at all times, even when they're out working. And so one of the older grandmothers just said, I don't know, I don't want to say the wrong word, but they said like, I think it was like no, like she was saying like keeping the baby close to the breast, making sure that they're being, whether it's comforted or nourished, just making sure they're close to you. And I also knew about the milk supply. Like I knew that if I wasn't nursing, my milk supply could fluctuate, could go up, could go down. And so I don't know. I guess I've kind of always had the mindset too that like once I set my mind out to do something, I'm just going to do it and it doesn't really matter what other people say. And I feel like when my daughter was born, or even before she was born, I was like, it's not just me that these are not just decisions that only impact me. Every single decision I make from now on is going to impact her as well. And so knowing what I knew about breastfeeding and bonding with your baby and like even kangaroo care, which is just having your baby close, especially if there's something going on with them, they need to be regulated. And yeah, I think it was just motherly intuition and just being like full blown mama bear.
It really can be hard in those moments to drown out all the voices.
I had a lot of them too.
Yeah.
Because I am the only one in our family, on my dad's side at least, who has breastfed. And in this generation, I should say, like, And I don't know, it was just like they were all so uncomfortable with it.
I want to tell you all about a podcast I've been enjoying. It's called The Lindsay Elmore Show. This podcast is for people who believe they deserve to be healthy. The show has featured many New York Times bestselling authors and authorities in a variety of fields. Topics have included mental wellness, working with our genes, holistic dentistry, how to eat to starve cancer, parasites, chronic disease, and being your own badass advocate, to name a few. Dr. Elmore is a board-certified pharmacist on a mission to empower others to make educated choices about their own health. I just listened to the episode with my kids called Smart Animals, Stupid People, and we all enjoyed it together. I also enjoyed the episodes about embracing pain to resolve it and better living with minimalism. Because I know many of my listeners are all about making informed decisions about their own health, I know many of you will appreciate this podcast. Check it out.
So what were those voices saying?
Basically that I should not feel comfortable nursing her in front of people unless she was fully covered up, or I should go do it in private. And then now that she's older, still the same thing. Like, she's old enough, she can eat food. Yeah, basically just like why do you feel the need to nourish her in this way? And but I think, like you said, there's a lack of seeing that growing up. There's a lack of education on it. And I truly feel there's a really big layer that is a part of our society is very detached from what should be the norm, from like what our bodies do, what the purpose of parts of our bodies are for. And a lot of the older generations have just been of the mindset that you have kids just to have kids, kind of like a baby doll culture, and they don't need you. And this huge push for independence, this huge push for gadgets being used or your children being away from you. And that just doesn't sit well with me. And because I've spent so much time learning about why it's so important and how that impacts every aspect of your child's life and every relationship as they grow, I wasn't going to let anything that anyone said stop me from doing this, because I knew how important it was for me. And I also know how important it is for her.
Now, were you able to find your voice in those moments? Because even those of us who can advocate so loudly for other people, it can be different when it's us and it's our family. So what was it like for you? Did you feel like you could say, hey, back off? Or did you feel like you just had to internalize it?
I would say maybe initially I was not as vocal about it, but then that might have lasted like maybe a few weeks. And then I was like, yeah, I'm not doing this. Yeah. So initially I was like, okay, I'll go in the other room and nurse or whatever. And then I was like, no, if you're uncomfortable with me nursing my daughter, whether she's hungry or she just wants to be near me, that is not on me. And that's also something that can trigger people, because they're like, well, you should be thinking about other people's feelings. I'm like, but your feelings are your responsibility. They're not mine. And I also just didn't want to have that be the standard for myself. And also, as she grew up, I didn't want her to see me not advocating for myself and me not normalizing breastfeeding. Like, we shouldn't have to normalize breastfeeding. The fact that that's even like a hashtag on Instagram is wild to me, because I'm like, this is what women have done since the beginning of time. And if you look back at, that's the other thing when it comes to people being so uncomfortable with seeing breastfeeding and seeing women breastfeeding, and that I really can't wrap my head around, because I'm like, okay, you're totally fine with women walking around in bikinis, walking around with push-up bras on, walking around with hardly any clothes on. But when it comes to women nursing their babies, using their breasts for what they're made for, you're so uncomfortable with it. And I even remember there were women who would give me looks when I was nursing. And I know, I mean, it still happens. But I'm like, can we all just support each other in the decisions that we make, please?
Yeah. Yeah. And are you talking about people out in public or people or both?
I would say more people out in public.
Mm-hmm.
Like when my daughter was first born, as soon as I could, I had her, as soon as I could walk around after I had healed a little bit. I walked every single day, twice a day, in the morning and at night. And I would have her in one of the wraps. And so I could nurse her very easily in the wrap. And I remember I would always see this older woman out walking, because we always walked at the same time in the morning. And she just used to glare at me like every single time I saw her. And I would be like, hello, how are you? Because I guess
you were nursing your baby in a wrap?
Yeah. It was so bizarre to me. But that's what I mean when I say like the generational piece of it is just that some older generations are just very, you should not be doing that. It's very inappropriate.
Mm-hmm. And did you have voices that were standing up for you? Like, let her feed her baby. If you were at a family gathering and they were asking you to go into the different room, was there anybody who was a voice of reason so that you didn't always have to be?
I would say more so on my mom's side than my dad's.
Mm-hmm.
My dad's side is just not, I'm literally the only one who has ever done it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's the discussion of going first and how that may not sit well with other people, but that's okay.
It's hard to be a first. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to be a first.
Yeah.
But, you're impacting generations of your family, hopefully, which is kind of
I
exciting.
pray I do.
Yeah. That's all you can do.
Yeah.
You're navigating these voices from your family and learning to breastfeed in public. And did you have any breastfeeding complications within those first weeks or months?
So I had an inkling that she may have ties, and I don't remember like who I asked. There were two people, and I don't know why I can't remember this. It might have been like not the doula who was there, but it might have been another doula that I had mentioned it to him, like, should I get her checked to see if she has this? And they're like, is she gaining? And I was like, yeah. Is she having regular diapers? And she was. She was sleeping. There weren't any indications that she was like struggling to breastfeed. It didn't hurt. Our latch was okay. It wasn't hurting me to breastfeed her. So two people said, no, it's probably fine. And looking back, I wish I went and got another opinion, because now I know that she has a lip and a tongue tie. But at the time, I was like, because everything else seems okay, then I'm not super concerned about it.
Mm-hmm. And what were the inklings that you were having then?
She was, I will say the only thing that she was dealing with was that she was gassy in the first few weeks. And then I was like, oh, I wonder if it's something that I'm eating. So then I was like, I'm eating eggs every day because it was a quick protein. And I stopped doing that. And then it seemed like her gas wasn't as noticeable, didn't bother her as much anymore. So I assumed that it was because of certain things in my diet. So I cut out eggs and I cut out dairy, actually. And knowing what I know now, I would not have done that.
Yeah, and that is no small sacrifice.
No, it was huge.
Yeah.
It was a huge difference in my overall diet.
Oftentimes pediatricians, for instance, go first thing to, reflux or dietary stuff.
Yep.
And, when it comes to some colicky symptoms or some gassy symptoms, and they don't understand that they are asking a huge thing of people.
No concept.
medicate their baby or to make all these changes to how they breastfeed their baby or
Right.
to change their diet when often there is an underlying cause that they are not educated about, which is
Mm-hmm.
tethered oral ties.
Yep. And I learned, I had that inkling. I made changes to my diet. And then while I was in my first few months of postpartum, there was a birth healing summit that you could join and listen to a variety of speakers on varying subjects, mostly within birth, pregnancy, postpartum, and then anything that you may face with your children as they grow. There was a guy who was on there who was speaking about tongue ties and all these different things. And I learned so much then, but I don't know why, like I didn't think to go get her looked at. And so she's been nursing for 3 years. She can speak very, very well, very clearly. People can understand her. She's not choking on her food. She can drink, she can eat. So I think the other part of that conversation is that there are so many reasons why so many more babies have tongue and lip ties and all these different ties now than they used to. And then also, do you get them revised or do you do other things? Like there's that back and forth, or excuse me, there's two different ends of the spectrum. So I don't really know how I feel about it.
Yeah, and it all goes back to the informed consent. I think each family just needs to know. It's an area of study that we don't know a lot about. So
Right.
anytime a provider is talking with a family, they need to say, this is everything I know about this.
Right.
These are the places where you can go to find out more information about this. These are the potential cons. This is why, if you think that somebody should consider it, this is why I think you should consider this. This is the impact it could have on your milk supply, or this is the impact it could have on your breastfeeding relationship. But in the end, every family does, like anything else, have to make that decision.
Yeah.
Where I get bothered is that
I was going to say, it's not even like a discussion in the hospital.
it's not a discussion, right? And pediatricians receive very little breastfeeding education, and they don't refer out to the people who do.
Right.
And so
Absolutely.
To hear more about tongue tie, listen to episode 50 called Could My Baby Be Experiencing Tongue Tie?, where I explain the differences between symptomatic and asymptomatic tongue tie. You can also hear my own very personal experience with a baby who had severe tethered oral ties that impacted my breastfeeding significantly and led me on the path toward becoming a lactation supporter. That can be heard on the Tongue Tie Experts podcast, episode 303 with Lisa Palladino. I'll link both of these in the show notes.
And then did you you ended up staying home with her for that first year of life or longer?
So I've actually kind of built my life around being able to be with her. So all of the jobs that I have had since having her have allowed her to be with me.
Okay.
So
Great.
I have nannied, and I am also a teacher for a younger age program, so she can be with me. So I've never had to have her be away from me for an extended period of time.
That's amazing. Do you breastfeed while you are there teaching?
Yes.
Amazing. Yeah.
It is. It's so awesome.
And was that a discussion you had with the employer before you took the job?
Yes.
Or you just did it?
Oh, no, I told them. I was like, I breastfeed my daughter. I'm not going to not breastfeed her while I'm here. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I also think that one of the cool parts of it, outside of me being able to nurse her for as long as I have, is that there are other kids who are in the program who've seen me doing that. And now it's like a normal thing to them.
Right. Exactly.
So, and
That's,
they've asked questions about it and we've talked about
yeah.
it. So,
Sometimes in those settings, that will be the pushback. Well, we don't know how the other families are going to respond, blah, 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 blah.
yeah.
And like, well, we can tell the other families that I'm feeding my child.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's obviously like the way I nurse her at home is different than when we're out
Of
somewhere,
course.
So it's not like I'm just fully letting both my breasts hang out or anything like that. So I think that just being mindful of
Yeah.
the way that you do it, it's not like I'm doing this to try and make anybody upset or make anyone uncomfortable. I'm just breastfeeding my daughter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I didn't mean to sound insensitive to what other families might be feeling if they have never been around to toddler nursing, right? Because it
Yeah.
can be a little bit surprising if you've never seen that. But it's also great that that was not a barrier for in your employer's mind, because
Yeah.
sometimes it can
It
be.
was actually interesting because there was another woman who she started after me, but she also has a daughter who's younger than mine and she breastfeeds her as well. And so she had talked to my boss about it and my boss was like, "Oh yeah, like Olivia does. It's okay." Like,
Hmm.
and she was like, "Oh." She was like, "Oh, I didn't know like that would be okay," or like that sort of thing. And so when my boss told me that, I was like, "Oh, well, that's cool," because now she feels more comfortable with it.
That's amazing. Yeah. Yeah. I had a friend who I interviewed on the podcast who has 4 children. And the first time I ever met her, I had joined a mother's group. And it was out at like I don't know, we had moved to this new area. So I joined this mom's group and I was meeting them all at some farm for like pumpkin picking or something.
Yeah.
And she had a toddler who was maybe like a year younger than my son. And she said she got that, she was going to feed, he was like 2.5 and my son was like 3 or something, 2 and 3 or something. And
Yeah.
she goes to feed her son and she's like, I wonder what this new girl's gonna like, is she gonna say anything? And then it turns out I'm a lactation counselor, I'm feeding my 3-year-old, like, and she was like, we laugh about it now, that little did she know. But it's great when you can be in a situation with another person. There's that solidarity, like, hey, we're in
Yeah.
this together. And imagine the anxiety that this person, your coworker, might have felt coming to her employer saying, I need to breastfeed my 2-year-old, and then the relief of, oh, there's somebody else.
Yeah. And I think that's the other thing too, is that like breastfeeding and then moms have to worry about what other people think or worry about how long they're nursing for in front of other people because other people are uncomfortable. Like the mental piece of it is so much. And moms already deal with enough mentally, physically, and emotionally after becoming mothers. We don't need to add more to that.
I
We just
call this
don't.
mom math. Mom math. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just adds to the mom math. This, like, how many people am I going to offend if I breastfeed my baby?
Yes.
Is it worth it? Do I have the mental energy to deal with it if somebody says something to me? Because sometimes you don't, and it's easier
No.
just to go somewhere else,
Yep.
So it does take a toll. It takes a
It
toll.
does. For
Yeah.
sure.
So as we wrap up, are there any moments when it comes to breastfeeding your daughter that you hope you'll remember in the nursing home? When all else has faded away, you hope something sticks.
I may get emotional. I just wish that more women knew that breastfeeding is not just about like nourishing your baby. Like the bond that my daughter and I have is so special. Like it's so special and a lot of people didn't understand and still don't understand why I'm still choosing to breastfeed her at this point. But we actually recently traveled. It was our first time on a plane and she did so awesome, and she nursed to sleep and she took naps both ways. And I literally was just sitting with her in my arms. She was sleeping, and I just started crying because I, I feel like there's just nothing in the world that compares. There really just isn't. And like knowing that we have that and I can make her feel safe and comforted, and she can go to sleep in my arms anywhere. And yeah, it was just, I won't forget that. I definitely won't forget that.
And that feeling, even if she doesn't remember it, the feeling of that safety and security will last for her life too.
Yeah. And we also, we hadn't had photos taken of us since she was tiny, like 6 months old. And those were some of the last breastfeeding pictures that I had that had been taken by somebody else. And we just got them done right before her birthday this year. And I just remember like sitting, nursing her, just like looking down and being like, well, we get to have these photos to remember this. Like, I know you probably won't, but I do. And I cried then too. It's just like,
amazing.
it's just, yeah, I want that for every woman. I really, really do. And for their babies too.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of what you want for women and their babies, tell me about your Be Loud About What Matters podcast project and what you hope to accomplish there.
Yeah. So I started that actually in March of 2020 was when I first started recording. And so initially when I went into it, it was just going to be pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, which obviously is kind of like an umbrella because there's so many topics that fall underneath those categories. And then once I became a mom, I just really wanted to talk more about all the things that lead up to that. Like I wanted to talk about the journey to conceive, then obviously pregnancy, birth, postpartum, but then motherhood. And then the informed consent piece became really, really strong for me after having her, because I started sharing all of these things that I was learning about. And I feel like that also kind of really helped me build my voice and feel comfortable saying things, and helped me really realize that a lot of the things that have to do with becoming a mom, like all of those topics that I just discussed, are just not spoken about enough. They're not discussed, and there's a huge lack of education and awareness. Resources are there, but they're hard to find. And so my goal is to help empower people in their own journeys, help them feel confident in their decisions because they are truly informed, not just from one side, like offering them the entire spectrum, both ends of the spectrum, so they can see this opinion, that opinion, whatever, and then make a decision based on what feels best for them. And also just having guests that come on the podcast who are well educated in whatever they're discussing, or who offer life experiences that they want to share, that like when you came onto the podcast and were sharing your experiences, no one has had your experience, only you have. And so I want to have a platform where people can feel comfortable coming on and feel safe sharing their story, and also know that at the end of the day, them sharing their story could positively impact they don't even know how many people.
Mm-hmm.
I just really want moms to know that they are not alone, and know that they can talk about these things and should talk about these things, and just build a community where women feel supported, mothers feel supported. Because in a society that's really not mother baby friendly, it's not only negatively impacting women and mothers, it's impacting their children too.
Great. And are you on all the social media? Can people find you if they want to connect?
Yeah, so on social media, I have two accounts technically. I have my personal account, which is Healing and Motherhood on Instagram. And then I have the Be Loud About What Matters podcast, Instagram as well.
Great. Awesome. So we'll link all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm honored to be on the podcast. And I'm so glad that you have created this space for women and mothers, because it's really, really important.
It can really be so difficult to drown out the voices of the naysayers and stand up for ourselves and for our children when we are making choices that our families don't understand or didn't make for themselves. And sometimes the choices we make in infancy and toddlerhood, like breastfeeding, baby wearing, co-sleeping, when to feed solids, what types of solids to feed, nurturing our children in a way we feel good about, are just the beginning of needing to stand up for the choices we feel are best for our families. If we are in a family system that doesn't understand the choices we are making, then breastfeeding or not may just be one of many parenting choices we make that we have to defend. So to all of you who feel you are going against the grain, I see you. You are doing good work. Whether you ended up breastfeeding or not, you are doing a good job. You are a good mom.
If you would like to hear me tell my story of birth and breastfeeding on Olivia's podcast, I talk about how it led me to my journey to becoming a birth and lactation supporter, and specifically how I feel it is so important to be educated about birth and breastfeeding before you begin your own journey. I have my episode to Olivia's podcast, Be Loud About What Matters, linked in the show notes, as well as links to her show on Apple and Spotify in the show notes. Check it out.
If you would like to join a community of people who are talking about these tough choices and the systemic barriers that make it difficult to feed our babies, come join my Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. I would love to see you there.
Hey, Charlie, what do you think about the idea that some people think it's gross for other people to breastfeed their babies or toddlers in public?
I don't understand why that would be gross.